Welcome back to CFO Weekly, where we're talking with financial leaders about how to build efficiency in their teams, create time for strategy, and ultimately get results. With your host, Megan Weiss. Let's jump right in.
Today, my guest is Anders Liu-Lindberg. Anders is a partner and co-founder of Business Partnering Institute. He's a leading advisor to senior finance and FP&A leaders on how to create an impactful finance organization. He's also an internationally recognized thought leader with around 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. Prior to BPI, he worked 13 years in various finance roles at global transport and logistics company Maersk. Anders, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Megan. I'm truly looking forward to this.
Yeah, I want to start with a quote from you, and I got this from your LinkedIn page, and you stated that, quote, "All finance and accounting professionals face a choice, evolve or be automated. Business partnering is one of those evolutionary paths that these professionals can take. However, despite being a desirable path for more than 2 decades, only a few have found the way and made it to the other side. Most are still on the journey and are having a hard time making it." And Anders, I know you're a leading advisor to senior finance and FP&A professionals and an expert at partnering with the business to create value. So I'm really looking forward to hearing how we can start this evolutionary journey and not get stuck along the way. So let's get started.
Great.
First, as always, let's start with you and your story and how it is that you got to where you are today.
Yeah, it's a tale of two stories. I think there's the corporate professional story, and then there's the story of the creator. So if we take the corporate story first, I worked 13 years in a global transport and logistics company Maersk. You've probably all seen the containers driving around any country that you might be in. Funny story, my wife is from China, and of course they also drive around in China. So we were once in China visiting the family, and my son, he saw this Maersk container driving by and he said, "Hey, Dad, your office is there." And I'm like, that's not exactly how it works, right? But it's always nice to be in a company that you can find anywhere in the world. Anyway, I worked there for 13 years in various finance roles, and my last role was as a senior finance business partner to a VP of a product with around $8 billion in revenue and $3 billion investments on the balance sheet. So pretty big role with pretty huge opportunity to make an impact. And I served in various controller roles, finance manager in the US, project manager for the finance leadership team, and I did training, I did development of the organization, I built organizations, and I did business partnering myself. So lots of different exciting experiences there at Maersk. At the same time, I was trying to build my brand in different ways, you can say. So I was getting active on LinkedIn sort of halfway through. I began at Maersk in 2007. 2012, I started sharing a bit of content on LinkedIn. 2014, I opened my blog on LinkedIn. Since then, I've published more than 600 blog posts on LinkedIn, and today we have more than 2 weekly blog posts coming out. And all that activity sort of led to various different opportunities, like co-authoring a book, Create Value as a Finance Business Partner. And in 2016, late, a guy called Michael reaches out to me. He was working at Deloitte and thinking that maybe he should do something different for himself, create a company that could help finance professionals become better at business partnering, the human side of the finance organization. And obviously, I was writing about this as well. So I thought, let me meet Anders and see where things can go. And it led to founding the Business Partnering Institute in 2018. Michael was the first full-time person joining, and I joined as the third full-time person in early 2020, just before the pandemic hit. So you can probably imagine how it is to become an entrepreneur just at that time. Interesting experience. Let's put it like that. But we are three partners, and the business is growing. And now today, I spend more time doing sales and marketing and very little actual finance work. Although I write and talk about finance all the time, it's more about meeting people, meeting potential clients, and so to speak, finding out how can we help them actually in these challenges that you just outlined in this quote you began the talk with, Megan. So that's that's where I am today. And, I never thought I would be in sales and marketing, but I'm honestly truly enjoying it. And I truly enjoy speaking to finance professionals all over the world.
It can be a stretch to have a finance background and then be thrown into sales and marketing. I've had to do it myself, so I know it's not the easiest of transitions.
No, it's been very interesting, but oddly enough, it's very similar to what I ended up doing at Maersk, even though there was no sales involved in that. The act of selling, at least what we do, is relationship selling. And the act of being a good business partner, which is what I've worked on for my entire career, is also about building relationships. So it's really just taking that relationship building skill and using it to sell. And sell, it sounds so direct and offensive to some people, but if you build a relationship, when people need your help, they will come to you. And if they don't, then no point in pushing it.
Yeah. So tell us about the Business Partnering Institute. What does business partnering mean to you?
Yeah. So business partnering, what does that mean to us? Well, we've put it on a formula. That's always works well for finance and accounting professionals. And we say business partnering is when you have insights that you can use to influence business decisions to create an impact in the company. And insights is when you have information that business leaders currently do not know about, but can help them make better decisions. It's a wide playing field, can be financial, can be non-financials, but insights can come from all over the place, right? We just need to help improve decision making. However, we also need influence, strong relationships, ability to communicate, and a good understanding of the business in order to actually gain the ear of business leaders. Because, you can have greatest insights in the world, but if there's no influence, it doesn't matter. So it's insights times influence that leads to impact. And impact can, of course, be different things in companies. Most companies, it's increased shareholder value creation, impact for customers and employees and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's often some sort of economic impact. So that's what business partnering is. And what we see mostly is that many finance professionals, FP&A professionals, struggle more with the influence. I think they have good insights, but they're not able to influence business leaders' decision making, and that's where we have the issue. So that's what we try to do and work on at Business Partnering Institute. We do this in various different ways. We create thought leadership to help people get perspectives on how to do this. We do learning and development to actually teach them how to do this, and then we do consulting to actually make them change ready for the changes that are coming. And we see great demand for business partnering assistance, if you can say like that, in the market right now. It's been around for 20 years, as you also mentioned in the quote in the beginning. But in the first decade, I think companies were trying to make it on their own. It didn't work because it's hard to actually do this in real life. So now they know they need help, and we're there to help them.
And why do you think it is so hard to do this in real life? Why is it that most people get stuck along the way?
So the funny thing is that it's actually pretty easy for me to explain why this is. There's two dimensions. It's very simple to understand what business partnering is. Insights times influence equal to impact. The challenge is that it's really difficult for people to do because it's about behavioral change. It's about working with people. And I ran a poll on LinkedIn last year. I asked finance and accounting professionals, why did you go into finance and accounting in the first place? Was it because you like to work with numbers, because you like to work with the business, or because you like to work with people? And not surprisingly, only 10% said because they like to work with people. But to be good at business partnering, you need to work with people, build relationships, communicate, and all this stuff. So it is difficult. And because it is difficult, many companies have made it complex to understand. They've made long guidelines or decks around what business partnering is and what you need to do and tools and whatnot. And, think about this, Megan. If you're faced with a 60-page slide deck, are you going to read it? Are you going to use it to guide you in what to do? Probably not. So no one knows what to do, and they ignore the guidance they get, and no change happens. So we must still make it simple to understand what it is, recognize that it's difficult to do, whereby giving people the proper help to actually do it, which could be training, for instance, or it could be leaders that are already doing it, or it could be giving the right organizational support. Right? So if we recognize that this is how it works, it becomes a lot easier. But most companies have made it difficult for themselves for various different reasons.
And what are some simple ways that a person can increase their influence? You said that's where most people struggle with the equation.
Yeah, so to us, it really starts with what we call customer focus or customer centricity. Now, when we say customer, we don't necessarily mean the external customer of the company, but we mean the customer of the finance professional, the business partner. So it could be a head of sales or head of marketing or head of plant, whatever it might be, some sort of business leader. Those business leaders, they have important business priorities. And if you as a finance professional can understand what are those priorities and come up with a plan of how to help them, you're already on a great start. Then, of course, you need to learn about, interpersonal dynamics. We'll do all these personality tests to understand our preferences for communication. And sometimes finance people, they like to communicate in different ways than business leaders. So we need to make adjustments in order to have a good conversation around this. And last but not least, we need good structures for how to communicate our messages. Because finance professionals, they tend to communicate with lots of details. And if there's something a head of sales don't want, it's a lot of details, right? They want to talk about the big vision and big customers we can land and so on. So we need to communicate in different ways. And those are some of the things that we try to teach, finance and FP&A professionals to do differently. And if they do that, they can do good business partnering. And then they can have a bigger impact in the company through influencing decisions.
And I'm just curious, but there's so much data available these days. So how do you choose what numbers to use to tell your story? And then what is the best way to tell a story to professionals who maybe just don't understand numbers or outside of finance?
Yeah. So, what to look for? Well, my advice is go ask your customer or the business leader. I think too many finance professionals, and I have to be honest, I've done this quite a few times myself as well. They just dump all the data into an Excel sheet, or if they're lucky, they have a BI tool, and then they are looking hard at the data. Maybe they organize it in a pivot table and like, where things are going wrong? What are the insights here? What does data tell me? The data rarely tells you anything, right? You need to know what you're looking for. You have to ask the business leaders, what are your challenges? What insights are you looking for to help your decision making? Once you know that, you can go and analyze the numbers. Otherwise, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack without knowing what a needle looks like, right? And it's impossible. So go ask your stakeholders, your customers, what insights they need. And then on the other question in terms of how to communicate, well, the challenge is that, as I mentioned, finance professionals, they often lead with the details. Instead, we need to lead with the answer. What's the situation we're facing? What complications do we need to overcome? What are the key questions we should answer as an organization or as a team? And what is my recommendation or answer to those challenges? That's where you start, by giving the answer. And then you can do the underlying arguments. Why is this a good answer? Or why is this a good way forward? And if they need more details, you have the underlying facts around why is this a good answer. Too often, no, we start with facts and we try to build it from the bottom up. But if you have half an hour and you lose them in the first 5 minutes, you're never going to get to slide 18 where you have your recommendation. It gets lost in translation. So lead with the answer and then, underline that answer and have a plan to go forward. What's your implementation plan? What does the business case look like? And so on and so forth. The main point, lead with the answer.
That's great advice. So are most of your clients individuals or are businesses coming to you for help?
Absolutely, mostly businesses, and there's usually bigger companies.
Okay.
Just because, so we do a lot of learning programs, and we do learning programs. It's typically teams of 20 to 25 people at a minimum. And often we work with bigger companies that have maybe 200 people that they want to train. So we run multiple cohorts over several years to ensure they all sort of get the same language and approach to how to influence decision making. So it's typically larger engagements with bigger companies.
And are these all FP&A professionals or anyone within finance and accounting?
It's mostly FP&A professionals. I mean, sometimes we have some more accounting or controller related roles. Sometimes you could have a tax professional or even an HR professional, because they also need to be business partners. But it's really mostly FP&A. If you look in the US sense, could be controllers if you look in the European sense, but it's people doing this FP&A kind of work.
And what are the current trends that you're seeing in FP&A?
A lot, obviously. We published the video early this year around top 10 trends in FP&A. But if I should try to simplify it a bit more, if you look at the processes, it's certainly around planning. Right? How do we do planning differently in a world that keeps changing faster and faster and faster? Right. So what are we really planning for? We just published an ebook today around planning. We basically say planning as we know it is dead. Because we need to plan in different ways. So the process needs to change. Keep doing the same old budget over and over again. It's kind of like madness. Yes, you need certain parts of the budget for different things, but it shouldn't be your main point of planning. If you look at technology, lots happening in the technology space in FP&A these years. I follow the venture market quite close in the FP&A space. And in the past 2-3 years, we've seen massive amount of capital move into the FP&A tech space. So it's probably a sign of some great things to come, especially lots of what we call third generation tools are coming in. So it's companies that have started in the last 2 to 3 years that aren't ready to compete with the Anaplans and the Workdays of the world, and certainly not the Oracles and SAPs either. But they're more targeting, let's say, small to mid-sized companies that before, let's say 5-10 years ago, could never get near an FP&A tool. But now with cloud and these new tool providers coming in, they can. So it spells great news for even small to mid-sized companies to get this insights that FP&A professionals can give to them. And in the people space, it's all about business partnering, because that's the only way we can increase the impact of the FP&A team. Because right now, CFOs remain disappointed with the return on investment they're getting from the FP&A teams. So something needs to change.
And I'm curious, how much automation is going on in FP&A? I was surprised. I had a guest on not too long ago that was in the AP technology space, and she mentioned that only 5% of companies had automated AP. So I'm wondering, FP&A is obviously much more complicated than AP. How much automation are you seeing in this space?
So I think, the big companies, they're absolutely doing it for their forecasting. I think, the Microsoft case, for instance, is widely known by now that, they use the different kind of machine learning models. I think they had 6 or 7 models with different kind of inputs. They then put that together to prepare the revenue forecast, and not the full P&L still, but the revenue forecast. And I think they started in 2016. And by 2019, they created a model that, instead of taking 800 people 3 weeks to create a forecast, now took 2 people 2 days. And there was 2 percentage points more accurate than the forecast you got from all these people working on this. So it's possible to do, let's say, predictive analytics now in FP&A. And I think we will see a lot more of this coming, just because it makes sense. If it's more accurate, then why not? Then we can focus on, instead of talking about what should the number be, we can talk about how do we make this number happen or improve it if we're not happy with what the forecast looked like. So I think it's definitely coming, but it's still early days. The pandemic has definitely pushed things in the right direction, but it's still early days.
And you mentioned that CFOs were not happy with the return on investment with their FP&A department. So how is it that businesses can better structure their FP&A to achieve its full potential?
Yeah, so I think, definitely revamp the processes, right? If you spend the first 2 weeks of a month doing management reporting, and then on average 1 more week doing planning, throughout the year, that's very little time you can actually spend, facing your customers, the business leaders, to help them drive forward initiatives or figure out, how to close gaps, whatever it might be. So that's very little, let's say, customer-facing time. And I think that needs to change. I've seen various studies that suggest, and we also see this when we run it on our clients, that 70% of the time is spent simply just enabling us going to business leaders to help them better decisions. 70% of the time working with the data just to make it ready for influencing. It's way too much time, right? So I think that definitely needs to change. And then there's the whole business partnering piece, right? It's about changing the mindset of FP&A professionals, because they need to do something different to actually make this work. Otherwise, they're never going to have the impact that CFOs are looking for.
And do you think FP&A personnel need to take more risks? And if so, what sort of risks should they be prepared to take?
absolutely, they should take more risks. I think in general, if you think about finance and accounting and FP&A professionals, you probably tend to think of them as risk-averse people. And I get it, that's maybe just in our nature. But if you look at it from a business perspective, without risk, there's no business, right? So unless FP&A professionals change the way they approach risk, instead of saying we need to eliminate risk in our business, we should say, how do we take the right risks for our business? And then, of course, when we take risk with our eyes open, we should have mitigating actions by all means, but it's about taking the right risks. So we need to be much more open towards taking risk, because right now, business leaders will look at FP&A and say they're just saying no to everything because they don't like risk. And that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's definitely not partnering with anybody when all you say is no.
Exactly.
So you mentioned processes before. At what point does an organization know that their process is broke or it's just not working within FP&A? When is that obvious?
I think, of course, it depends on how big the organization is, right? But if I was an FP&A leader, I would at least every 6 months do like a process check to see how much time are we spending on some of the key processes, and does that prevent us from actually having that customer focus that I talked about? And if the 70% remains on those key processes that FP&A needs to run, that we spend 70% running the process, and we don't change that, then you need to do something a bit more dramatic. But obviously, companies go through different life cycles, and sometimes you need to spend a lot of time building these processes. Then you run them, and then you become a different company for different reasons, and then you need to change it. So it's difficult to pinpoint exactly, but I would do these kind of temperature checks at least twice a year to see how we're keeping up with the changes in the business.
And for a company that's ready to start transforming FP&A, where do they even start? Are there frameworks to follow, or how do you begin the process?
So I think there's two things to consider. The first is the change journey you're looking into, and the second is changing the mindset, because if the mindset isn't changed, it doesn't matter what you do to processes and technology. And you can always find different kind of change management frameworks. But to me, it's about understanding, why do we need to change? Is it because of the CEO telling us, or CFO, or is it because we're struggling as a company? Doesn't matter, but we need to have a why for what we want to change. Then in the leadership team, and it's not just an FP&A, it should be the whole finance leadership team, we need to agree on that changing FP&A is a key priority. Because if there's 10 other priorities happening at the same time, changing FP&A, it won't happen. Then we need to create sort of like an exciting ambition or vision for where we want to go, and then change the organization to fit this vision. Then we can launch it to the organization, say these are sort of the changes that we want to make. Organization needs to change. Here's where we're going to invest in technology. Here are some of the process changes we want to make, and then we're going to train you. We're going to empower you to take action for these changes to happen. We've planned for having short-term wins. So it's not just a new planning tool coming 2 years from now. No, we plan to actually have some wins in 3 months so we can celebrate, because we need to celebrate the wins. And then it's it doesn't happen in 6 months, right? It can take some years to create the change you want. You might start small and then scale. And then you also need to make sure that it sticks, right? So if you run a training program, for instance, once you have taken the first 20 people through and you still have 40 more to go, what happens to those 20 people? How do you ensure that they actually start working in new ways? You can't just let it go after the training has stopped. So there's a lot of elements to consider there to take your team on the right change journey.
And to get people excited about this journey, how significant is an improved FP&A to an organization? What benefits does that achieve?
So I've termed sort of the opportunity as the $1 trillion opportunity. And, it could probably be an even larger number, but now it just shows $1 trillion because that's a huge number that people can relate to. And why do I say it's $1 trillion opportunity? Well, I say that because an improved or high-performing FP&A team can surely improve the EBIT or EBITDA, whatever margin the measure you have, with at least 1 percentage point in the company. And if you do that globally, you take 1 percentage point of the global EBIT, we're probably talking about $1 trillion, right? So it's huge. And 1 percentage point is probably even conservative. So it's a huge opportunity, and that's also why CFOs know they need to get more from FP&A that they might not be getting today.
Yeah. And you mentioned the need to take more risks, but what other mindset should FP&A professionals develop in order to succeed in their work?
Yeah, so we really talk about 5 key shifts to make. One of them is around risks that we already talked about. Stop wanting to eliminate risk instead of or favoring trying to take the right risk. So that's one of them. The second is, stop thinking about trying to minimize the cost in the company or minimize the cost of finance FP&A. So you often see benchmarks when you start your transformation and say, your FP&A team costs 0.5 percentage points of revenue. Benchmark says 0.3%. So you need to be cheaper.
Yeah.
But having that mindset of we always need to be cheaper really doesn't drive business value mindset. It just drives a race to the bottom. So we definitely need to change that storytelling and say it's not about minimizing costs. Yes, sure, we should be efficient all the time, of course. But we need to focus on how do I maximize business value? Because after all, that's the opportunity. That's the $1 trillion opportunity we're looking at. It can be revenue, it can be cost, whatever. It changes for companies all the time. And we need to maximize that value. The third thing is, we need to stop only explaining historical financial performance because we cannot change it. Right? It's history. We might be able to find a few insights from it, but it's history. So we need to say, instead, how can we improve future performance? Looking at the leading indicators for financial performance, business metrics, and spend our time there. I'd say good FP&A professionals, they spend at least 80% of their time looking at business metrics and thinking with their customers, how can I improve these? Because after all, if business metrics are going in one direction, you would expect the financial metrics to follow. There might be some delay, but they should, all things equal, follow each other. And of course, if there's a mix-up, so they don't follow each other, you need to understand why. But focus on improving future performance. Fourth, we talked a bit about it already, right? But we spend so much time with the data and the reporting, and we think that actually brings value to the company. But all we're doing is just telling people, business leaders, what they already know. They might not know if sales is up with 2, 3, or 4%, but they know if sales is up or similar down. So it's not really helping them, right? So we need to come with those relevant insights, something they don't know, but can help them make better decisions. And last but not least, the fifth shift, and to me, this is actually the most important one. Stop thinking we can succeed through reaching own objectives. FP&A, finance at large, we are there because there's a company. The company is not there because of finance or FP&A. So we are succeeding through others. And I think this is very, very important for all finance and FP&A professionals to understand. We are succeeding through others. Right? So you need to change that mindset and say, how can I help my business leader be successful? And accept that you cannot be a success yourself if your business is not successful. It just doesn't work. And I think, if we can make this shift, we suddenly will get a lot more buy-in and acceptance for the sales leaders out there, the marketing leaders out there. Suddenly like, okay, FP&A is not here to beat me up. They're actually here to help me succeed, because if I don't succeed, they don't succeed. So, let's do this together. So those are the 5 shifts to make. And if you can change that mindset from, say, a cost center to becoming like a profit driver or value driver, that's huge. But that's also where we start.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, teamwork is so important these days. It's time to break down silos and work across the organization to improve the business. Absolutely.
It's all we should be doing. There's no other, okay, maybe there might be some control and compliance if you work in accounting, but otherwise there's nothing else we need to do. That's it.
And based on your own experience, what advice would you give to someone who's hoping to get into FP&A or maybe just starting out in FP&A to help in their career?
Yeah, start with the right mindset, right? So if you have the benefit of not having had 10 years experience in FP&A and maybe being set in old ways, then start with that new mindset. And then, always think about how can I improve? How can I change the time we spend on working with data and reporting and analysis in favor of working with insights, influence, and impact? And of course, if you are just starting new in FP&A and you're a financial analyst, it's probably not you going to the CEO or the CXO, whatever, and presenting your insights, but you are enabling someone else to do so. And so help them in that space, but start with the right mindset, I think, is my best advice.
And lastly, you've given out a lot of great advice today, but if someone listening to the podcast were to remember just one thing or take away just one thing from this episode, what would you want it to be?
Yeah, so I'll probably take it all the way up to the highest possible level of what FP&A should do, because we didn't talk so much about that, at least not directly today.
Yeah.
But what is FP&A's mission in a company? It is to drive the right choices. I even say strategic choices in the company. That's where the value is created. If you're not driving the right decisions and making choices for your customers, your business leaders, then you're not adding so much value. So you need to be up there all the way at the strategy table, down to execution and the feedback loop back again. And that requires probably that we need to transform some things, change some processes, use better technology, change the mindset, train the people, all these things that are involved in the transformation. But that's what FP&A needs to do, drive those right decisions and choices in the company.
And for listeners that want to get in touch with you and learn more, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can always reach me on LinkedIn. It's sort of my primary channel for everything I do. I post content there daily. I have my 2 blogs or newsletters with close to 160,000 subscribers today. So you can go and subscribe to those. There was 3. You'll get an email whenever I publish something. So there's lots of ways to reach out to me, to interact with my content, and to get the latest insights from BPI and myself.
Anders, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks a lot for having me, Megan. I truly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed speaking with you and hearing about your experiences and all the resulting insights that you've gathered along the way. Wish you and Business Partnering Institute all the best. Sounds like you're both doing really amazing things for the FP&A profession and finance and accounting in general. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Megan.
And to all of our listeners, please tune in next week. And until then, take care.
If you're ready to boost efficiency and streamline your accounting processes at significant cost savings, it's time to talk with Personiv. Their people-powered solutions have transformed the delivery of back-office tasks and general accounting functions for decades, partnering with clients to provide everything from accounts payable to payroll services. See what Personiv can do for you by visiting personiv.com.
You've been listening to CFO Weekly, presented by Personiv. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts to hear all of our episodes. Want to learn more? Check out personiv.com. Thanks for listening.